They weren't just bandmates. They were brothers forged in noise, sweat, and impossible dreams. Before the sold-out stadiums, before the screaming crowds chanting their names, before the platinum records stacked like trophies of immortality, there were just two young men from New Jersey chasing something they couldn't yet touch, but could already feel. And for decades, they built something together that felt unbreakable. Until one day, one of them disappeared. No warning, no farewell, no closure. And now, after years of silence, Richie Sambora has finally begun to reveal the truth, not just about the band, but about brotherhood, betrayal, and the quiet pain of becoming invisible in something you helped create. Because this isn't just the story of a guitarist leaving a band. It's the story of what happens when the music stops, but the silence keeps echoing. Long before the world knew the name Bon Jovi, before the lights and fame rewrote their lives, there were just dive bars, borrowed amps, and relentless hunger. Richie Sambora grew up in Woodbridge, New Jersey, a working-class town where dreams weren't handed to you. You had to claw your way toward them. Not far away, in Sayreville, another young musician named Jon Bon Jovi was chasing the same impossible vision. Both were shaped by the same influences, the storytelling grit of Bruce Springsteen, the emotional fire of blues-driven rock, the belief that music wasn't just sound, it was truth. They played wherever they could. Small clubs, backyard parties, anywhere that would let them be heard. They weren't famous. They weren't rich, but they were alive with possibility. When Richie joined Jon's band in 1983, something clicked immediately. It wasn't just technical skill. It was chemistry, the kind you can't fake. Jon had the voice, the charisma, the face the world could rally behind. But Richie brought something deeper, emotion, texture, soul. Together, they weren't just musicians. They were unstoppable. From the very beginning, Richie Sambora wasn't just playing guitar. He was shaping the emotional backbone of the band. His solos didn't just fill space. They told stories. Every note carried weight. Every riff carried meaning. When the band exploded into global superstardom with albums like Slippery When Wet, it wasn't just Jon's voice people connected with. It was the conversation happening between voice and guitar, the dialogue between two artists who understood each other without speaking. Richie's harmonies elevated every chorus. His instincts made every song feel bigger than life, but still deeply human. Fans saw Jon at the front of the stage, but those who listened closely knew Richie was right beside him, holding the entire emotional structure together. They weren't just co-workers. They were partners, brothers in sound. And for a while, that bond seemed unbreakable. Success has a way of rewriting relationships. As Bon Jovi became one of the biggest bands in the world, something subtle began to shift. Not overnight, not dramatically, but slowly. Jon became the face of the brand. The interviews centered on him. The spotlight followed him. And while Richie remained essential creatively, publicly, he began to fade into the background. At first, it didn't matter. They were still making music together, still touring, still building their legacy. But behind the scenes, the balance was changing. Decisions became less collaborative. The band began to feel less like a brotherhood and more like a machine. Richie, once an equal architect of their sound, began to feel like a supporting character in his own creation. And the silence between them began to grow. At the same time, Richie was fighting battles no audience could see. Personal struggles, emotional wounds, the collapse of his marriage to Heather Locklear. Fame had given him everything and taken more than anyone realized. He carried the weight quietly. On stage, he smiled. Off stage, he was unraveling. And perhaps the most painful part wasn't the pressure. It was the loneliness. Because even surrounded by bandmates, crew members, and millions of fans, he began to feel invisible, unheard, disconnected. The brotherhood he once relied on no longer felt the same. And that realization changed everything. In April 2013, fans gathered in Calgary expecting another unforgettable night. They expected the anthems, the energy, the magic. But hours before the show, shocking news spread. Richie Sambora would not be performing. The official explanation was vague. Personal reasons. No further details. No timeline. No clarity. Fans assumed he'd return soon. He didn't. Weeks passed, then months, and eventually, the truth became impossible to ignore. He was gone. Quietly, permanently, he had stepped away from the band that defined his life. Even more painful was how he found out he'd been replaced, not through a phone call, not through a conversation, but through the internet. The band had hired Phil X. Just like that, after decades of loyalty, Richie was no longer there. It wasn't just professional. It was deeply personal. Because sometimes the loudest betrayal isn't what's said. It's what isn't. For years, fans speculated. Was it creative differences? Personal conflict? Ego? But the truth was far more human. Richie wasn't just leaving a band. He was choosing his daughter. He had spent decades touring the world, chasing success. But time is unforgiving. You can't pause it. You can't rewind it. And Richie realized something terrifying. He was missing the moments that mattered most. He didn't want to become a ghost in his own child's life. He didn't want to wake up one day and realize he had traded fatherhood for fame. So he made a decision that shocked the world. He walked away, not because he stopped loving music, but because he loved his family more. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is leave. After Richie's departure, something strange happened. No public feud, no dramatic confrontation, no explosive interviews, just silence. Years passed without real answers. Jon continued with the band. Richie focused on his personal life. To the outside world, it looked like two professionals moving on. But beneath that surface was something far more complicated. Because you don't share decades of dreams, struggles, and triumphs with someone and simply forget. Even in silence, history lingers, and questions remained. Would they ever speak honestly about what happened? Would they ever reconcile? Or was this truly the end? More than a decade later, Richie finally spoke, openly, not with anger, not with blame, but with honesty. He admitted he regretted how he left. He acknowledged the confusion and pain it caused, and perhaps most importantly, he apologized, not just to fans, but to Jon. He admitted he should have communicated better, should have explained himself, should have given closure. It wasn't about ego. It was about survival. He had reached a breaking point emotionally, creatively, personally. Leaving wasn't an act of rebellion. It was an act of self-preservation. And for the first time, the world understood. This wasn't a story about betrayal. It was a story about being human. Fans still dream about it. One stage, one moment, one final reunion. But reality is rarely as simple as nostalgia. Time changes people. Life moves forward. Jon has faced his own struggles, including serious vocal issues that forced him to rethink his future. Richie has built a new life defined by balance rather than chaos. They are no longer the same young men who once ruled the world together. And maybe that's okay, because some partnerships aren't meant to last forever. They're meant to exist exactly when they do, and leave behind something timeless. Their music didn't disappear. Their legacy didn't vanish. It lives on in every note, every lyric, every memory. Today, Richie Sambora isn't chasing fame. He isn't trying to relive the past. He's focused on something far more meaningful. Healing, family, authenticity. He still creates music, but on his terms. He's no longer defined by expectations. He's defined by freedom. He speaks with gratitude about the journey, about what they built together, about the brotherhood that once was. He doesn't deny the pain, but he doesn't live in it either. Because sometimes, moving forward is the greatest victory. No matter what happened behind the scenes, one truth remains undeniable. Together, Richie Sambora and Jon Bon Jovi changed music. They created songs that became part of people's lives. Songs that carried people through heartbreak, hope, loss, and triumph. Their partnership wasn't perfect, but it was real. And real things leave lasting impact. Even when the spotlight fades, even when the stage grows quiet, even when brothers walk separate paths. Because the music never forgets, and neither do the millions of people who live their lives through it. In the end, Richie Sambora didn't just walk away from a band. He walked toward himself, And sometimes that's the hardest and most important journey of all.